Well, I'm not the only one to notice this, but 2021 seems to be off to a bit of a slow start, in terms of new releases at least, which doesn't really surprise me, considering that the state of the world hasn't yet shifted from what most of 2020 brought us, so, well, we'll take what we've got anyways. And I did find a lot more to like this time around too, so yeah, let's not beat around the bush any longer. Let's kick off this month's Albumpressions. I swear, it seems like all the good metal, or at least metal adjacent releases lately, are from Screamo. I saw this tagged as emo violence, which I don't quite agree with. This was in the same vein as Anteros, I feel. A bit of a post-metal undertone to this one, a good, dynamic album vision, a really strong rhythm section. I do think that the production here doesn't really flatter the higher end. Some melodies get a bit buried in the wall of mid-range guitar riffs and bass and drum synergy, but I did like how varied it felt, with a few instrumental interludes to space out the intensity while still keeping in line with the tone. I admittedly can't make much sense of the lyrics, but that hardly matters to me when the core sound itself is this intriguing. I don't think this is the next Baghdadski 4 or Anteros for me, but it's definitely worth checking out all the same. It's always nice to be pleasantly surprised by something you thought was going to be a disaster. It took me a bit to figure out exactly why this sound works for me when so many similar ones don't, and, well, it feels like in the Hackride's Lazarus, another album I love, in its style and execution. This is, at its core, a gent album. I don't like gent much. I've said that many times before. But this album takes a much more atmospheric and locked groove approach to the genre than bands trying to be heavy or technical just for the sake of it, and stumbles upon a rather compelling, engaging sound that I don't actually want to think about that much. More just get lost in the flow of it. I do think it might be lacking a bit too much edge. Another comparison I can make is the Contortionist Clairvoyant, though this is not as ambient or ethereal as that album. Is it a bit long? Well, yeah, it's 76 minutes long, so duh. But the mix of melodic guitar leads, cleaner vocals, and almost hypnotic rhythms alongside a strong album flow kept it engaging for me the whole way through regardless. Very pleasant surprise here. I feel like my usual fallback for how to make a good first impression really applies here. Just be interesting, damn it. And yeah, this definitely is. A sort of Tool-esque prog metal sound driven by riffs, bass grooves, and a rhythmic focus above anything else, with lots of other influences thrown into the mix to make it something more than that. Moments of tribal sounding drums and chanting, some electronic and industrial influence passages, even caught a moment or two of Arabic folk influence, and I'm probably missing something else even besides that. I do get the impression that all this colorful genre hopping is in part to pave over what is not exceptionally compelling metal on its own, and it's another case where the album's definitely running longer than it needs to, but it keeps itself fresh enough that whole way through by just being weird enough to remain interesting. Definitely makes me want to check out their debut as well. I think one thing I found out about black metal production lately is that, more than anything else, mixing your album right makes all the difference in the world, and this album does a good job in that aspect. The guitars are always at the front of the mix, with the percussion and vocals sitting just behind them to drive the intense, cold, wintry sound without drowning out the atmosphere the guitars create. It's a bit folk-touched, but not overwhelmingly so, and the integration of accordion on At the Foot of the Red Mountains is very appreciated anyways. And the songwriting approach is dynamic enough that I never felt it got boring or stale, though I wouldn't have complained if some of these tracks are stretched out even longer either. I also felt the bonus track actually made for a better album closer than the actual album closer, funnily enough. Very good early contender in the scene of atmospheric black metal, and a great sound for these cold winter months too. Definitely worth checking out. Wait, no, that's not right. Okay, so story time. This is a weird one. So, towards the end of January, a band named Ghostfuneral started getting some attention and acclaim after releasing 2 math rock flavored emo albums about a week apart. The mastermind behind the band was also formerly in the band Significantly, who had also gotten some acclaim right at the start of the year and had broken up earlier in the same month after some internal band drama. Weirdly, both Ghostfuneral albums had a very different style to them, the first being a lot rougher and chaotic, the second being more structured and heavier in sound. Anyways, they played a mind Minecraft concert right at the end of January, and a few days later, the organizer of that concert uploaded the concert footage to YouTube and got an, interesting copyright claim. Turns out, both albums Ghostfuneral put out were straight re-uploads of 2 albums from 2 completely separate bands, Lawn Chairs and the band that I'm talking about here, The Planet U. After being found out, Ghostfuneral promptly disappeared off Bandcamp, Spotify, and Twitter since, the grift was up at that point, but it goes even deeper. Turns out, the mastermind behind Ghostfuneral had done this 3 other times already, including Whip Significantly, and didn't get caught until now. And on top of all that, it seems to be some bizarre attempt at revenge, maybe? The acts stolen from almost all included 2 people in particular, Max and Noah, and isn't this a curious tweet now? Ghostfuneral was never a band, just the one person, and all the band drama was completely invented using the names of their victims. Like, what the actual hell? It's a fascinating, bizarre, and kind of unsettling story. Don't plagiarize, kids. Jesus Christ. Okay, anyways, on to the actual album itself. If I can thank Ghostfuneral for one thing, and one thing only, it's introducing me to this album because, man, this slaps. There's that math rock / emo thing going on here, though this leans more towards a post-hardcore level of heaviness with enough oomph in the guitars to really sell it. And there's just enough balance between wild, noodly guitar work and foundational grooves to keep it from veering too far off in either direction. It's delightfully chaotic. I've admittedly never been a massive fan of the Fall of Troy, but this definitely gives out some similar vibes as them. Though there's something here that's clicking with me in a way that band never has. My one concern is that I'm not sure if these songs are going to stand up to being all that memorable or emotionally compelling. That kind of comes with the territory of math rock, I feel. But it's a nice surprise that I found through very unfortunate circumstances, and I hope that this act gets the boost that they deserve from this whole debacle. This one took me 2 listens to even begin to have anything to say about it, and even after that, I'm not really sure how I feel about it. This one's a doozy, to say the least. Only a bit over a half hour, but it uses that time to merge hardcore punk, black metal, and chiptune, among other minor influences. So it's kind of a chaotic mess, yes, but an interesting one for sure. I do like how all of its main elements are constantly interacting, almost as if they're always fighting with each other for dominance. Maybe one overtaking the other's momentarily, but never truly overwhelming each other. There's just a good balance to the sound. I do have my gripes. The production doesn't favor melody, leading to an often busy and overcrowded sound. And in general, I wish they'd work more on writing an actual tune, as a lot of these songs don't feel very linear or even dynamic, alongside all risking getting caught in a blur of noise, but at the same time, I mean, I definitely am intrigued enough to want to keep coming back to it, so... So this one is a lot. Not lengthwise, it's only 17 minutes long, but man, that time is spent well jumping through pretty much every brand of metalcore and screamo out there. And I mean, the album has individual songs, but it's one of those cases where they're all so short and flow into each other so smoothly, it's hardly worth considering them separate. This is an album meant to be listened to front to back without interruption, and I was honestly expecting something a bit different than what I got. This is more akin to Senza than it is your average metalcore or mathcore release. Fitting, since they have Senza's 2019 album recommended on their Bandcamp page. There's moments of crushing heaviness, but also more tuneful riffing, a few moments to breathe between the madness, and even a catchy hook or two. It ends up feeling really dynamic, and not as impenetrable as, say, a band like Gulch or Betrayal of Guilt. Also greatly appreciate the violent but firmly left-leaning content of the lyrics, too. I wouldn't have minded if it ran at least a bit longer, but I feel like I'm gonna be spinning this one quite a lot in the coming months anyways. So this was a bit much. Okay, I knew about this album and the general idea of what it was, but hadn't really been inclined to check it out on my own time. Until Glass Beach went and did a cover of Beach Life and Death earlier this year, and, well, suffice to say, I found a lot to like in that cover. Its narrative dealing with life, love, queerness, and all the messiness it entails, as well as just the way it ebbed and flowed musically, even outside the context of the album. So yeah, that definitely made me curious to give this album a listen proper, and well, before I touch on the content, which is the bulk of what matters here, just musically, it is a very solid, dynamic, probably very intricately detailed indie rock album. Will Toledo's voice isn't necessarily to my taste, but he's got a lot of emotional range and conveys pretty much all of it across the album. The one thing I did notice compared to the Glass Beach cover is that it's very simple and straightforward in its instrumentation, lacking the indulgence that cover had, mostly serving as backing music to heighten the emotional drama, which, man, there's absolutely no way I'll be able to dig in fully to this one here, but even without being able to directly relate to a lot of the content, aromantic as I am, there's still a lot to empathize with here, even at its base level. But there's two other layers to this that intrigue me even more. One carried over from the original, which I have not heard, probably won't either. Lo-fi of that variety is hard for me to stomach. The overarching theme of taking this real-life relationship and converting it into a fantastical narrative, not necessarily the way it all happened, but still enough to capture all that messiness, all the emotional spirals, and preserve it in a piece of art the way he wants it to be remembered. It's an act of moving on from what's done, from what can't be changed. I think that, more than anything else, is what gets to me about this album the most, and why I absolutely broke down in tears during the final track. But then there's also that meta layer the re-recording adds, being a re-evaluation of the original, returning to that fantasy that was lost in a haze, refining it, making the image more clear, adding or changing details about it. Even that preserved image of the relationship is impermanent, can be changed at a whim, probably still isn't ideal or perfect, whatever that could possibly mean, and yet will still probably be lost to the sands of time in the end, as we all eventually fade away. Anyways, yeah, the album, I liked it, I guess. And on to viewer requests. Less requests came in this round, but if I'm being honest, I felt the quality was much higher overall. Everything I heard, I at least mildly enjoyed, usually more than mildly too. And I definitely found this set more interesting to talk about too, so let's get right to it. Ooh, here's where things get interesting. I'll gladly be upfront and admit that I don't really go out of my way to listen to many of the quote-unquote classics, artists or albums or otherwise. I know a fair few Billy Joel tunes, obviously, but I've never listened to any of his albums in full. And well, yeah, this is pretty good. A bit inconsistent, as there were definitely a few tracks here that didn't do much for me. James felt kinda like filler, and Prelude, Angry Young Man is musically fantastic, but its message comes off as really defeatist to me. It rubbed me the wrong way at the very least. New York State of Mind, that's a certified classic, one I already knew, and yep, it deserves it. The writing in general is strong across most of the album too. All You Want to Do Is Dance and Miami 2017 also stood out as highlights in that regards, especially the latter, oof. Oh, and there's prominent saxophone throughout, which, yeah, I'm a bit of a sucker for. In general, I did like the front half more than the back half, but it was overall a positive experience, and I'm definitely glad I checked it out, if nothing else. I do feel like I've heard this style of rock-tinged synth-pop done better before, even with my relatively shallow dive into this genre pool. Suffice to say, I find this kind of music better in small doses rather than as full albums. But I did like this well enough for what it was regardless. I do feel like they have a knack for hooks, though sometimes through repetition to a fault. But I can't imagine another listen or two through this getting some of these songs lodged in my head permanently, and I wouldn't mind them being there. I'm also all in favor of the openly queer content across the entire project, obviously, though I'm not sure their personality extends far enough beyond that to really stand out for me. They're mostly just a lot of love songs and or breakup songs when you get right down to it. And in general, the sound on this album can tend to lead the songs to run together a bit, though I never really felt bored at any point either, so I'd say this isn't something I'm likely to return to often, but there's plenty to like here. And that'll do it for this month. I'm surprised at how long this one ran, but, well, a few of these gave me a lot more to talk about than I usually want to with this series. I'm kind of breaking format here, but, I mean, I think it's worth it in this case. I try to make this series about raw, unedited first impressions, and sometimes I just have a lot to say. Regardless, it was certainly an interesting month for me album-wise, and I'm excited to see what the coming months bring too. Until then, I'll see y'all later.